It's interesting here covering the Dodgers and the Giants so close consecutively, not only due to their rivalry with one another now in Los Angeles and San Francisco, but sort of their tied history between each other as, I guess, fleeing New York franchises to the West Coast. Yeah, I guess you could describe it as that, and some people would.
They're an 8-time World Series winner, which is why we know we're getting down to the bitter end here.
Right, I think we only have a few teams left now
I think we just got the Cardinals, the Red Sox, the A's, and the Yankees.
And the looming Yankees.
right. So, and they... what I like about them when I started looking at the franchise history is they've only played in 3 ballparks and they started in 1883.
So they played in the Polo Grounds
in
forever.
1883. They were playing in the Polo Grounds.
Wow.
Right. And so they played there all the way until 1957.
And the Polo Grounds continued to be used because didn't the Mets play there?
The Mets played there their first 2 seasons in 62 and 63 before Shea opened in 64.
Right. So that's interesting how long the Polo Grounds lasted as a stadium.
Right. And I unfortunately never got to go there.
And a stadium that I think is intrinsically linked to the New York Giants is anything, because I think if there's anything people think about with the New York Giants, it's probably either Willie Mays or the Polo Grounds.
And that's the only stadium the New York Giants ever played in. So I think that's really important. Then they went to Candlestick Park, but between the time they went to Candlestick Park and left New York, they had to build Candlestick Park. So they played 2 seasons in Seal Stadium.
So they played in 4 then.
Right. I don't even think about Seal Stadium. You're right. It's 4. Right. I was thinking in terms of made parks that were built for them. The Seals were a AAA team.
Right. So they played there.
Giants played there for 2 years.
There, and then they played in Candlestick, and now they play in.
When they opened up, I think it was called AT&T Park.
Yes.
It was called Pac Bell Park.
Yes.
And so it's been named like it was 3Com Park, I think, at one point.
It's been named a bunch of different things.
But
it's the same building, with its most iconic part probably being McCovey Cove.
And it's a beautiful ballpark.
I've never. Have you been there?
I've been to that stadium, and I saw one game there, and it's it really is beautiful. And the old joke about Candlestick was that the coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. And that was I think it was WC Field, something like, and that was going to Candlestick Park.
It isn't the old thing about Candlestick Park that when they went there to put the stadium, they went there at like a particular time.
In the morning, it was really nice.
And it was really nice. And they're like, oh, we're going to put a stadium right here. That was before all the fog rolls in.
Right, the fog rolls into the old, the legend says, it's Horace Stoneham, and they get in their cars and they drive away, and the fog is sort of chasing them as they're leaving. It just rolls in, and that place was just a miserable place to play. Just miserable.
Players did not like
Nobody liked it. It was not a hitter's park. It wasn't, and the Giants had little success really in that park when you think about it. They went to the World Series in 62, and then they went again in the Freeway Series in 89, and I think that was it, because by the time they were good again, they were in what is now AT&T Park.
But let's go back to the beginning, because I think it's interesting, like we started off with talking about with the Dodgers and their New York counterpart, is that the Brooklyn Dodgers still feel intrinsically linked to the LA Dodgers. That is part of their franchise history. Whereas, at least to my perception, the New York Giants feel so far removed from the San Francisco Giants. Like, the fact that they also left New York kind of is almost an afterthought. Whereas with the Dodgers, it feels like a huge part of their history.
I guess the story is that Walter O'Malley was the ringleader, the guy who convinced Stoneham to move the Giants. So you're right, when the Giants were not an afterthought, but he needed a partner, did O'Malley of the Dodgers, to go, and the Giants finally said, well, they're not building us a new ballpark here either, just like the Dodgers, and so that's why they agreed to move out there. So you're right, they were sort of, we went along for the ride, and the Dodgers had success when they got to LA, and the Giants made that one World Series, and then they weren't really heard from again. So they won their first World Series in 1905, John McGraw, that was a big deal, and then they won in 21 and 22 in 1933 when they beat the Senators. Didn't go back to 1954,
and that's the Willie Mays.
Actually, right, when they won, and when they didn't win again until 54, the Willie Mays catch, and then the 3 that you talked about. Right. So there's a lot of gaps when you think about the time from 1954 to 2010. No Giant World Series wins. I'm not good at math. That's 56 years, folks. That's a lot.
That's a long stretch for any team.
Right, and so they lost the World Series a bunch of times in 1911, 12, and 13. That must have been fun. 1923 and 24, so they had this losing thing going on. 36 and 37.
Well, it shows you how good the New York Giants were as a franchise for the first, from 1900 to 1940. they were as good as any franchise in some respects.
They've lost 10 World Series, and I don't know. I guess I should know this. Like, is that more World Series losses than any other team? It feels like it would be way up there.
They might be up there in terms of number of appearances, aside from the Yankees. They might be number 2 in terms of appearances in the World Series.
Right. Well, and the World Series, and so because they did a lot of that. Now that with the playoffs and stuff like that, there's lots more appearances that you make and all that. And you have to think about just getting to the World Series, was everything.
That many times,
right?
It was a lot because you just had to win your league. So only 2 teams went to the playoffs.
So when we do these deep dives, we look around and we think, okay, so who are the the famous Giants? And when you think about the guys who their numbers are retired or whatnot, that's a different group than the Hall of Famers because the Giants have an amazing amount of Hall of Famers.
Right. The number of people that have worn a Giant uniform and then also been elected to the Hall of Fame is an insane number of players. But a lot of those guys were like, that guy was a Giant. Like, I'm pretty sure there's a shot of Randy Johnson in a Giant uniform.
You're right.
Right. So it's like, okay, he played for the Giants, but he's not a Giant pitcher.
Right, but they have a list, and we'll talk just for fun. We'll name some like guys that Gary Carter had a cup of coffee.
Realistically, if you love Immaculate Grid, just wait for that section. We're going to help you win for the Giants for a while.
Right, because that guy played for the Giants. Steve Carlton was a Giant. Yes, he was. So, Christy Mathewson doesn't have a number retired for the Giants because they didn't have numbers when Christy Mathewson pitched.
So it's like the last name retired?
Just CM. Is what it's like, okay, he's retired, but we don't give him a number. John McGraw, the manager, and he played for the Giants, and he was known as Little Napoleon.
Is that supposed to be a flattering nickname?
No,
okay,
no,
I didn't think
no.
so.
There's sort of like a power, and there's a movie coming out.
Well, also because Little Napoleon, like, how was he just that short?
Yes,
was he a midget?
5'6".
Oh, okay.
5'6", and a really good player. And he stopped really playing, and he became the player manager for the Giants by like 1901, when really modern day baseball started. But in the 1890s, he was the guy. He was like the first star of that era. So McGraw, is a Giant through and through, and he had a Little Napoleon thing. So I was going to say there's a movie that's coming out that apparently is making the case. I forget who's playing Napoleon, and he's taller than you would think because they said,
isn't it Joaquin Phoenix?
It is. I think you're right. It is. You're right. And so basically the idea is that they had the French measurements and the English measurements, and they got it all screwed up, that Napoleon really wasn't as short as everybody thinks, but they had calculated incorrectly because of the difference in the way that it was measured. So an interesting idea. I don't know if it's true, but John McGraw is Little Napoleon. 2 announcers, one of which you would know only maybe because Lon Simmons was a radio broadcaster, not the one. Russ Hodges.
No.
Okay, so the Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant. Oh, that's Russ Hodges.
Okay.
So he's probably in the Hall of Fame for more than that, but as far as I'm concerned,
that was sort of what elevated him.
That's what it goes. So, okay, I'm going to name the Hall of Famers. I think you will know
most of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
I think you'll know all of them. Bill Terry.
Yes.
Batted 400 one season.
Yes.
So that's what puts him there. Mel Ott.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Carl Hubble.
Yes. Pitcher.
Okay. You're correct. Screwball pitcher. Monty Irvin.
No.
Okay, and so I looked up Monty Irvin a little bit, going, okay, so why is Monty Irvin in the? Well, he played 10 years in the Negro Leagues before, at like age almost 30, he got to the major leagues. Played 8 years in the National League and was an excellent player. And has a 135 career ops plus.
What did he play?
He played outfield, a little first base, and he was sort of like the guy that got screwed the most by not being able to get in, because he was ready to play in the major leagues in 1947 when Jackie Robinson didn't get in there until 1950 or 1949.
So he wasted away. He had to waste another 3. Well, not waste, but he wasn't allowed the chance for another 3 years.
And I when I looked at his all-time statistics, I thought, okay, it doesn't look completely Hall of Famers, but there are so many extenuating circumstances with Monty Irvin in particular, and he was a very exciting player, and at the height of his powers, he was one of the best players in baseball. But if you look at his all-time stats, you might go,
Right, but if he was the kind of guy that had been properly allowed to compete,
that's how
he would have put up the Hall of Fame numbers easily, and he just wasn't allowed the chance.
How about Will Clark?
Yes.
Will the Thrill, as Chris Russo would say.
Now, Will Clark, is that the modern day Will?
Yes, yeah. Will Clark.
And I think I think of him sort of like as an old guy, because he was.
He's not.
But by the time I became aware of him as a player, he was much later into his career, so I don't have a good sense of him. in terms of what made him a Hall of Famer.
Excellent fielder, terrific hitter. I mean, a hit for average. Developed some power later in his career. Was a clutch ball player. Is one of those guys he's an almost guy. I mean, he really, Keith Hernandez gets there first. Mattingly probably ahead of him, but Will Clark is there.
Right.
He's at that level.
He's at that level of like, this guy was just a really, really good first baseman for a really long
on some good
time.
teams. And had some ungodly playoff, I think, against the Cubs, where he just hit everything they threw at him. And there's a guy named Willie Mays.
Yeah, okay. I don't think we need to question that.
And Barry Bonds.
Yep.
And Juan Marichal.
Yep.
And Orlando Cepeda.
Yep.
Okay. Gaylord Perry.
Yep.
Okay. Willie McCovey. And that's it. I mean, Jackie Robinson, too. But so to me, it's like there's none of these Hall of Famers like, who is that guy?
Cepeda's probably the one I know of as a player the least.
Yeah, he was Rookie of the Year and was MVP, but he did a lot of damage also as a St. Louis Cardinal, but he got his start in the majors with the Giants. So, if you look at those guys and you think, okay, how do they stack up all time in history? And you try to pick up, we like to pick our all-time Giants. So the Giants have 6 Rookies of the Year, by the way, before we do that. Mays, Cepeda, McCovey, Gary Matthews. Okay, so Gary Matthews, I think he was. Is Gary Maddox or Gary Matthews? Now I'm confused. 2/3 of the earth is covered by water. The other third by Gary Matthews, or Maddox, or Gary Maddox. I can't remember which is. I'm screwing that up. John Montefusco was a Rookie of the Year, the Count of Montefusco, as he was nicknamed.
I do not know who that is.
No, you wouldn't know that. And a guy named Buster Posey.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good list of rookies.
And that's, I think, where we can start, because if we're naming our all-time Giants by position, I think if we go to the catcher position, it's Buster Posey.
It is Buster Posey.
And it's not particularly close.
Well, and is another Hall of Famer who's a catcher for the Giants, played way back at the beginning of the 1920s. Roger Bresnahan. You've heard the name, but again, when guys play over 100 years ago,
it's really hard to appreciate them as a player.
Only idiots like me actually follow them. So, Buster Posey is the guy. Let's do the pitcher first. So if you had to, I picked one. Who do you know? Be careful here.
Do you go Marichal?
I have him on the list as he's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
In fact, they're all Hall of Famers. Carl Hubble I put in there with Marichal, but I picked Christy Mathewson.
Right.
The Big Six, as he was known.
And he's so iconic, and I think it's just the way he is talked about from his era makes it hard not to pick him. Even though I think we don't really have a sense of truly how...
There's no film.
There's no film. We're just relying on people's words and the stories about how good he was. But by the stats and by the stories, he was every bit the dominant ace of his era, as as Koufax was of his.
And the Giants have a fairly robust pitching tradition when you think about, in more recent years, Lincecum and Matt Cain.
They haven't
Madison Bumgarner.
They haven't had a guy that's lasted a while.
Not like Marichal.
No.
Not like Hubble, and not
All
like Christy Mathewson.
All those guys kind of had like a peak of 3 to 5 years where they were unbelievable, but then they faded off after that. They haven't had the guy that, they haven't had their Kershaw.
And so that's why those guys are Hall of Famers, and Lincecum and Cain are not. And Bumgarner is not going to be a Hall of Famer either, I don't think. So at first base, I'm
guessing Mel Ott?
He was an outfielder.
Really? I thought he was more first baseman.
No, he was an outfielder. I tied it. We mentioned Bill Terry's name. Actually, we mentioned both guys. Both guys are Hall of Famers. Bill Terry and
McCovey.
Yeah, McCovey.
Yeah.
No, good. Yeah. Now, Will Clark, gets an honorable mention here.
Right, but he does not enter the conversation with those two.
I did look at Will Clark okay, so what happened to Will Clark in the Hall of Fame? So when he was on the ballot, he didn't make it to year 2.
Ooh.
Because there were 8 Hall of Famers on the ballot the year that he
Right. And that's one of those guys that kind of gets an unfair shake. Like,
that happens.
You were in a year where a bunch of guys happen to also retire.
You're good, but not that good.
Right, and so they take up so many spots, you don't got a shot.
Yeah, and so we'll have Dan Brown from The Athletic on the podcast coming up this week, actually, after the vote on Tuesday. And one of the things I want to ask about is how many unused votes are there for guys people that vote and they vote for 6 or 7. There's these extra spots that could be used to keep people on the ballot if you want. They're not going to win anyway, but I don't understand people that don't vote for 10 guys, because there's a lot of unused votes that could go and maybe push guys over the top that
right, and you don't have unfair edge cases where it's like, okay, Will Clark did not go to and deserve to go in the Hall of Fame. He should have been here, but we would have liked to talk about him more.
Exactly. Should have been on the ballot year 2. At second base, This was, I guess,
A
tough.
lesser position for the Giants, you would say?
It is. It is, I think.
Because you really only have... I can think of one guy that I would probably put on here, and he's a borderline guy. And that's Jeff Kent.
Right, and he is. I put him on that same side tying with Frankie Frisch, which is a Hall of Famer.
Right.
And he was traded for Hornsby
and it's just like he didn't play. Did he play that long for the Giants?
He played more years for the Cardinals than he did for the Giants, which is why I kind of knock him down a little bit, even though he's a Hall of Famer and Kent is not yet.
Right, but did he go in as a Cardinal or a Giant?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. But
I would have, because it's like he got traded, so that's unusual because he got traded back then when there weren't a ton of trades.
And he played 8 years for the Giants. So 8 years, it's not as many as he played for the Cardinals.
And it wasn't like Kent played his entire career for the Giants either. He played seasons for the Mets.
Right. And the Blue Jays, actually.
I didn't think about that.
I think he came up with the Blue Jays. And back in when they were good from 1905 to 1930, from 1907 to 1908, a guy named Larry Doyle, he had like a career WAR of 45, 50. I thought, okay, there's a guy I don't know anything about, but because he played on good teams, was a good player, I decided to mention his name. Shortstop's worse.
Yeah.
Shortstop's worse. I had trouble off the top, okay, who's
Brandon Crawford?
And so I did the same thing you did. Rich Aurelia was a pretty good shortstop.
He had a couple seasons where he was amazing.
But an all-time Giant shortstop. So I came up with a guy I didn't really know much
Giant
about.
Fans, this gets much better when we get to the outfield.
Yes. Alvin Dark was a guy who ended up managing the Giants later. Also was a good mid-50s
like a movie
shortstop. Art Fletcher, who I knew almost nothing about. The Giants have 0 Hall of Fame shortstops.
Which is just interesting, given that they're a franchise that's existed for so long.
Not that important to us. We don't really think shortstop's that important. So no, that's not what it is. It's just interesting how some positions,
for some positions for certain franchises, they could just never figure out. And I think it's almost part of baseball's charm that the Giants. If you're a Giant fan, you're like, yeah, we've never had our shortstop.
Right, and here's the thing. So we said that second base, we're hoping Frisch win it as a Giant, but we're not sure, right? Because he played more for the Cardinals.
Well, they don't have their second base.
No Hall of Famers at second base. No Hall of Famers at shortstop.
No
Hall of Famers at third base.
Because I was gonna say, if you're looking at all-time shortstop, third baseman, you're gonna say Pablo Sandoval.
No, I did mention him there. I picked Matt Williams, who was a guy who had a case for the Hall of Fame, even though he's not a Hall of Famer. Had some amazing years, including an MVP.
He was not a full career Giant guy, but most of his best days.
He played for Arizona.
Yeah, but most of his best days were for the Giants.
Absolutely, I think so too. And Heine Groh, who played back also about the same WAR.
You didn't need to tell me when he played back. We know it's way back.
Guys named Heine are not around today. You're saying
he's not being named. Anybody named Heine Groh is.
How about Heine Griffey? Does that not work for you?
80+ years ago, guaranteed.
No, Heine Otani not working. No. Okay. Anyway, they don't have any third basemen that are in the Hall of Fame either, which really surprised me. That around the infield, only first base.
And they have great ones.
They're good there.
Now we can now give Giant fans their due. Let's go to the outfield where it's pretty good.
So and of course I put him on the left side because I'm bent to him. But they have a Hall of Famer named Ross Youngs. Who had a good career, but not a great career, and I don't even put him on the all-time list.
The problem if you're a Giant outfielder, right, is you're basically competing for one spot because 2 of them are already taken by a man and his godson.
Well, and then Ed Mel Ott there,
right?
And now we're done.
And now we're done because you have Willie Mays in center, Barry Bonds in left, Mel Ott in right.
There you go.
And you're looking at what might be the finest overall outfield for any franchise, except maybe the Yankees.
Right. And I just wished I had gotten to see Mel Ott play with the leg. He had a big leg kick, and I'm like, oh man, I just little guy hit the ball a ton.
That is, you come almost. I think we should talk about.
Well, we said the Dodgers were pretty good in the outfield. These guys are too.
Right. We should talk about probably Mel Ott because I think everybody that listens knows about Willie Mays. They know about Barry Bonds, but I think certainly people my age do not have appreciation for Mel Ott as a player.
511 career home runs
at a time when guys did not hit that many home runs.
But also was a really a guy who took advantage of the fact that he played in the Polo Grounds, and that right field line was under 300 feet down the line. I'm going to say it was was 296.
And he was a
to
right-handed
right
hitter.
field, a left-handed hitter.
Left-handed
So
hitter.
that's why he's just poking him in there. So when I told you the story, so when they built Yankee Stadium and Ruth had played those 2 years in the Polo Grounds before they built the new Yankee Stadium, they basically just replicated the line down the right field for the Yankee Stadium because he was hitting home runs just the way Matt Lott did out to right field, and they had a short porch in right field. The Yankees short porch is still there, today, not as short as it was then. So I think but this guy knew enough to say, well, I'm just going to sell out and pull the ball down the line, and he did that
whenever he could,
and he did it very effectively. So yeah, huge WAR, B-WAR all time. This is an all-time great baseball player, and if you like to do crossword puzzles like I do, he's always in there because it's hard to come up with an OTT word if you need to fill it in. So it's like, giant great. Mel, oh yeah, I know who it is. It's Mel Ott. Yeah. So those are your guys. I picked up one other guy that I wanted to mention. And by the way, Bobby Thompson, the guy who hit the home run, not close.
No.
Not close. And he played a lot of third base too. Jack Clark. And I don't know how much you know about Jack Clark.
I don't.
Okay, so Jack Clark played in the 80s. He might have even
no
come
relation
up in the late
to
70s.
Will Clark.
No relation to Will Clark. Feared right-handed hitter. Probably a career WAR in the 40s.
Wow.
Yeah, and was like the way Gary Sheffield was intimidating at the plate was the way Jack Clark was at the plate. And so it should get more props for being
a fine player.
Yeah, just as short of a haul. You don't even know who he was. He played a lot of years for the Cardinals too, and was really good there. But he did more of his damage as a Giant.
But the kind of guy that he was a really good player, but he's just lost the time because he wasn't one of the greats.
Right. He wasn't great enough to be a Hall of Famer, right. I guess is what it was. But I there's a guy as a Met fan never wanted to see that guy come to the play. He was tough on us. Closers. Can you name any? Because I had trouble with that.
Didn't they have that really fiery guy for a couple of
right,
years?
So not the Beach Boy, Brian Wilson with the beard and the whole thing, and he was putting shoe polish in his beard to make it extra black, and he was the closer. Sergio Romo, but no, I don't think so. Rod Beck was a longtime closer for them. Rob Nen, and also
I do remember him.
Okay. None of those guys.
But I think closer is one of the positions that franchises are most likely to not have some kind of all-time guy at, just because it's something that didn't exist for a long time. Like it's like if you're looking at the closer position, well, that means you're only looking at San Francisco Giant history because
there was no closers.
You're right, exactly.
Or they might have been just like a fireman or something like that. They would call the guy.
But they did not use a guy to come in the ninth inning specifically the way we think of it.
The guy's pitched the whole game.
Yeah, so it's just different. So you're way less likely to have a kind of dominant closer. And it's just unusual that the Yankees of all teams happen to have the best one of all time.
Yeah, no manager wanted to go out and take out Sal the Barber Magley when he was pitching for the Giants. And you know why he was called the Barber?
He would buzz you back.
Yeah, he'd give you a close shave.
Yeah.
And manager-wise, so
McGraw?
Yeah, I'd pick McGraw, but you could make an argument for Bochy as well because he won the 3 World Series. Then McGraw won 3 World Series, but he was there so much longer, and he was so much the embodiment of the Giants.
Of the New York Giants.
Right. The no-hitters, they have 17 no-hitters.
Right, which is interesting because I think they only have multiple from a couple guys.
You're right, and Christy Mathewson would be one of those guys.
Right.
The other guy is
Matt Cain?
Lincecum. Good guess, though. I would have thought that, too. So let's finish this
with our list of random guys that have worn a Giant uniform that you wouldn't expect to, i.e. your immaculate grid answers.
Right, the Hall of Fame register for them. So we mentioned Gary Carter and Steve Carlton, which I didn't know those guys were there. Okay, other guys, Tony Lazzari, who played for the Yankees back in the 20s, and he's the famous striker. He obviously played for the Giants long enough.
Hall of Famer?
Hall of Famer. So we talked about Cepeda. Rich Gossage, the Yankee relief pitcher.
Also known as Goose.
Played for the Giants. I don't think I remember that. Joe Morgan, probably people don't remember that he played late in his career for the Giants. Red Schoendienst, the Cardinal guy, obviously played there too. Ernie Lombardi, the catcher I always talk about associated with the Reds, somehow ended up there. Hoyt Wilhelm, all right, the knuckleballer is in there. Travis Jackson, who played very early in the 20th century. Frank Robinson, right, for the Giants. Johnny Mize.
I don't know him.
Johnny Mize was a very good ball player, but he played back in the early part of the 20th century. Duke Snyder.
Oh wow!
So he played for the Mets, the Dodgers, and the Giants.
And he
did not get the Yankees.
Didn't get the Yankees.
He didn't get the Yankees. Hack Wilson played for the Giants, Hall of Famer. Amos Russi played for who was obviously a Hall of Famer. I'm trying to think of any other names. Waite Hoyt, another guy who pitched for the Yankees very well, for ended up pitching for the Giants at the same time. And obviously Casey Stengel played for the Giants.
Oh, wow.
So there's just a lot of guys. I could go on. There's all kinds of other guys that that we know. I'm trying to think of any other names like that guy played. I don't really have anybody else that sort of jumps as the
notable.
I think of him as another team,
right?
And how did he get to be with the Giants? So that's just a lot of. We should have done that for every team.
Right. I think it's interesting that there's a lot of notable guys that are in the Hall of Fame that ended up specifically wearing a New York Giant uniform at one point.
Yeah, I mean, and Cap Anson played for the Giants,
right?
I had no idea. I didn't. So I think it's a franchise that because they've had so much success in the past 25 years, not even 15 years, you think of them more positively, and you don't think about the drought like we talked about from 1954 all the way until, and in the 1962 World Series, and I think you were going to talk about this a little bit, so they made it to the World Series in 62, they're playing the Yankees, winning run in scoring position, seventh game, Willie McCovey at the plate, this is what you want, and cracks a line drive that Bobby Richardson somehow jumps up and catches, comes down, World Series over.
And I think what's interesting is, so this is, I think, before highlights were really a widespread thing. Because had that been a successful hit, that would be talked about and people would remember that 62 World Series hugely. But because the last play was kind of anticlimactic and there was no memorable shot of him snatching it out of the air and the game just being over, it's just sort of forgotten.
And McCovey...
People don't talk about that play like it's his all-time World Series play. They talk about if it had been a successful hit.
Right. And McCovey, never won a World Series with the Giants.
And people would talk about, then it would be so interesting because then that 2001 loss to the Diamondbacks would be so much mirrored back to the 62 loss to the McCovey hit, had it actually been a hit.
Yeah, and not only that, they got back to the playoffs in 71, but they lost to the Pirates, and the Giants were not heard from again very much for a long time.
Till 2002, till the Freeway Series in 2002, really.
And I like McCovey's career because he played 22 years, and he played 19 years with the Giants, 3 years with the Padres, and 1 year with Oakland, so he never left California.
He liked it out west.
Because he started with the San Francisco Giants in 59, so he never was a New York
never
Giant.
New York Giant.
But he never had the success either. He never got to taste the champagne or that from winning a World Series. So too bad for Stretch, who was one of my favorite players. I saw him hit a ball off the speaker in center field at Shea Stadium against the Mets that I've never seen a baseball go that far. So love the Giants. We have just a few more of these to do. It's a lot of fun if you've if you want to write to us and tell us about anything that we could talk about, else that we're not covering in some of these deep dives.
Yeah, anything that we have left over, anything that you would want to hear, we love to hear it. And
we're getting near the end of these.
And once we're done with these, we're going to be going into our season preview.
Right. And we're going to do This Week in Baseball.
Oh, yeah, we got a bunch of stuff lined up.
We got lots of stuff. So, and check us out for the Dan Brown podcast that's coming out later this week.